I stayed overnight at a nearly empty hotel. I heard someone in the walls. I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who tells stories like this. That's the first thing. I know how that sounds. Everybody who tells a story like this says they're not the kind of person who tells stories like this. But I mean it in a specific way. I've spent most of my adult life working in environments where you document things carefully, where you don't speculate, where you write down what you observed and nothing else. So if I'm going to tell you what happened at the Hargrove Suites, I'm going to try to do it the way I would write a field report. Accurate, sequential, with the parts I don't understand clearly labeled as parts I don't understand. Some of this I've told before, pieces of it, to one person in particular, which I'll get to. But I've never sat down and gone through the whole thing from the beginning, and I think I've decided that doing that might help. Maybe not in the way that people usually mean when they say something like that. More like how describing the shape of a hole gives you information about whatever made it. So, the Hargrove Suites, the job. I work in facilities compliance, have done for about 11 years now, for the last 7 at a firm that contracts out to hospitality groups, hotels, resorts, extended stay properties. What that means practically is that I travel. A lot. I go to a property, I spend some time there, could be a few days, could be a few weeks, and I assess whether the physical structure and operational systems are meeting regulatory standards. Fire safety, accessibility compliance, plumbing certification, HVAC documentation. It's detailed, it's unglamorous, and it is almost never interesting. I say almost. The Hargrove Suites was a mid-tier hotel in a mid-sized city that I'm not going to name precisely. Not because I'm trying to be dramatic about it, but because there's an ongoing administrative process that I was asked to stay quiet about, and I'm still technically bound by that. What I'll say is, it was in the upper Midwest. It was February. It was the kind of city where the downtown hotel district exists mostly to serve people attending things at the convention center. And between events, the whole area has this hollowed-out quality, like a stage set with the performers gone home. The Hargrove was 7 stories, built sometime in the late 1960s, renovated partially in the early 2000s, and then sort of allowed to coast. That's the word I'd use. It wasn't falling apart. Everything worked functionally, but there was a quality to the place of having been just maintained enough to avoid being condemned. The carpets in the hallways were a deep burgundy that had probably been chosen to hide stains. The elevator was original to the building, but had been updated with modern safety components. The lobby had a certain amber warmth from lighting that was slightly too warm, slightly too dim, like someone had permanently set the ambiance to intimate, without accounting for the fact that intimacy in a hotel lobby mostly just feels vaguely wrong. I'd been assigned the job on fairly short notice. Another compliance officer had been scheduled to do the assessment, but had a family thing come up, and I was available. And so I got the file emailed to me on a Thursday afternoon and flew out that Sunday. I'd been to properties like this dozens of times. The Hargrove didn't set off any particular flags from the paperwork. There were some outstanding items on their last inspection, a few fire door certifications that needed updating, some questions about the kitchen ventilation, a handful of things in the maintenance logs that needed clarification. Standard. I checked in on a Sunday evening. The lobby was quiet, not the quiet of a place that's closed for the evening, but the quiet of a place that was simply not busy. There was a woman at the front desk, young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of professional friendliness that comes from training rather than temperament. She processed my check-in efficiently. I mentioned I was there for the compliance assessment, and she nodded, said the general manager had left a package for me, and slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a key card, a printed sheet of room assignments, and a handwritten note from the GM explaining that he'd be in Monday morning at 9, and we could debrief then. His name was Terrence. The handwriting was careful and even, the kind of handwriting that takes effort. The property was running at roughly 18% occupancy. I know that because it was in the pre-assessment materials. 18% in a 7-floor, 212-room hotel is almost nothing. It's ghosts, the financial kind, and the kind that makes a building feel strange at night. Most of the guests were on floors 2 and 3, clustered there for efficiency because it costs less to heat and maintain a building when you concentrate your occupants. I was on the 6th floor, not by my request, just how they'd assigned it. Terrence, Terrence Okafor was the general manager, and he was, without question, the most competent hotel manager I've encountered in 11 years of doing this work. I say that not as flattery, I never met him again after this, but as a professional observation. The man knew his property the way a surgeon knows anatomy. He could tell you without consulting a document the date of the last boiler inspection, the square footage of each conference room, which of the third-floor rooms had a persistent issue with the bathroom exhaust fan, and exactly what had been done about it. He walked me through the building on Monday morning at a pace that was brisk but never rushed, and he answered every question I had before I finished asking it, which is a thing that almost never happens. He was a tall man, probably mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone who'd spent decades being the calmest person in a room. He wore a dark blazer over a light blue shirt, no tie, and he moved through the hotel the way people move through spaces they have internalized completely without looking at corners, without checking signs, just navigating by something internal and automatic. What I noticed about Terrence early on was that he was careful, not in a nervous way, in a practiced way. Like someone who has learned, through experience rather than instruction, that precision prevents problems. On that first morning walkthrough, we went floor by floor. I had my clipboard. I still use a physical clipboard, which people find old-fashioned, and I was noting things as we went. Terrence talked while we walked, the way experienced managers do, offering context before I asked for it. He'd say things like, "That corridor, second window on the left, the seal isn't perfect, we've got a repair scheduled for spring," and I'd make a note, and that would be that. When we got to the sixth floor, something shifted slightly in the way he moved. I didn't name it at the time. It was small. He kept his hands in the same position, one in his pocket, one loosely at his side, but his pace became very slightly more deliberate, the way people walk when they're paying closer attention to their footing. "You're on this floor," he said. "Room 614. Is that standard for guests doing an assessment?" He considered this. "We don't often have guests on this floor during low occupancy periods," he said, "but the rooms are well maintained. You'll have the corridor mostly to yourself." I asked if any other guests were on 6-1, he said. "Room 622, long-term. He's been here several months." I didn't ask more about that at the time. Extended stay guests at off-season hotels aren't unusual. You get people relocating for work, people in transition between homes, people who find that the anonymity of a hotel suits some phase of their life that they'd rather not discuss. We finished the walkthrough. Before we headed back down to the lobby, Terrence paused just briefly, with his hand on the door to the stairwell, and said, "A few things about this floor. Practical things." I had my clipboard ready. "The HVAC on 6 runs louder than other floors," he said. "Old ductwork. You'll hear it at night. It can sound like more than it is. Knocking sometimes. Occasionally something more like a voice. It's air movement through old metal. Just so you're not alarmed." I made a note. "Anything else?" "The fire door at the end of the north corridor. 6 North is alarmed and should not be opened except in an actual emergency. It's alarmed on both sides. If it's triggered accidentally, it goes directly to the local fire station. We've had false alarms before, and the department is patient about it. But it's a disruption." He paused. "So please don't open it unless you need to." "Of course." "And the room at the end of the south corridor, 638, is not in service. It's been taken offline for maintenance reasons. There's a sign on the door. I mention it because the door doesn't latch correctly, so it can drift open. If you see it open, you can close it, but please don't go inside." I nodded. "What kind of maintenance issue?" He looked at me with a very measured expression. "Mold remediation," he said. "We're waiting on the contractor." I wrote that down because it was relevant to my assessment. "I'll need to document the timeline on that." "Of course, I have the paperwork in my office." We went back downstairs. The conversation was completely normal. I wrote it up in my notes that evening, in exactly the terms I've just described it to you. HVAC noise on 6th floor, fire door north corridor alarmed. Room 638 offline for mold remediation. 3 practical facts about a floor in a building I was there to assess. I didn't think anything of them beyond that. The first few days. My assessment was scheduled to take roughly a week, maybe a bit longer if I needed to follow up on anything. I had a desk in a small office adjacent to the lobby that the hotel made available for me, and I worked there during the day going through documentation, cross-referencing what I saw on the walkthrough with what was in the maintenance logs, scheduling time with the facilities manager to look at specific systems. It was methodical work. I liked it actually, the kind of work where progress is visible, where you can see the pile of completed things growing. The hotel around me had a specific rhythm during those first few days, and I want to describe it carefully because the rhythm matters later. In the mornings, there was a modest breakfast service in a small room off the lobby. I was usually the only one there, or sometimes there'd be one or two guests from the lower floors, people I nodded to but never spoke with. The dining room had windows that looked out on the parking lot and the street beyond, and in the February light, everything had a flat, washed quality gray sky, gray pavement, the occasional car moving past. It wasn't bleak exactly, just reduced, like a painting where the artist has carefully removed everything unnecessary. During the day I worked, I went through the building systematically, checking things against my list. The facilities manager was a man named Dale, who was pleasant and direct and knew where everything was, and he unlocked rooms and mechanical spaces for me without complaint. I liked Dale. He had the quality of someone who was good at his job without needing anyone to notice. In the evenings, I went back to my room, ordered food from the one delivery service that operated in that area, watched something on my laptop, and slept. I slept well those first few nights, better than I usually do in hotels. The sixth floor was quiet genuinely, substantially quiet in a way that felt earned, like the quiet of something old and settled rather than the artificial quiet of new insulation. Terrence was right about the HVAC. It ran and it made noise. But it was a consistent noise, a mechanical conversation happening inside the walls, and your brain adjusts to consistent sound quickly. By the second night, I didn't hear it consciously at all. It was just the building breathing. I walked the sixth floor corridor a few times for the assessment. There were 24 rooms on 612 on each side of the building, numbered 601 through 638, with some irregularities in the sequence because of the elevator lobby and linen closet. Most of the rooms were dark, doors closed, keypads unlit. The carpet was the same burgundy as the other floors. The lighting was that same amber warm dimness. Room 638 was at the far end of the south corridor, just as Terrence had said. There was a laminated sign on the door, room temporarily out of service, maintenance in progress. The door was closed. I made a note in my assessment, documented the out-of-service status, cross-referenced with the contractor timeline Terrence had provided. The long-term guest in 622 I saw only twice in that first stretch. Once in the elevator, where he got on at the lobby and stood facing forward with his hands clasped behind his back, and got off at 6 without looking at me or saying anything. He was older, maybe early 70s, slight, with white hair combed neatly to the side. He wore slacks and a cardigan. He looked like a retired professor, or maybe an accountant, the kind of man who has reduced his life down to the things that are simply important to him and let everything else go. I thought he was probably fine. People who stay in hotels for months at a time, in my experience, are usually just private, and their privacy deserves to be respected. The second time I saw him was in the corridor, late, maybe 11 at night. I'd gone to the ice machine. He was walking slowly toward his room, and when he passed me, he nodded, very precisely, just once, and that was the interaction. His expression was neutral. He didn't seem distressed or unusual in any way. I went back to my room. I didn't think about either of those encounters beyond the moment. The third night, here's where I want to be precise because this is where the account becomes less routine. On the third night, I woke up at my phone said 2:47 for no reason that I could identify. No sound, no dream I could remember. I just came awake in the way you sometimes do in unfamiliar places, with that sudden alertness that feels like your body has heard something your mind hasn't yet processed. I lay still for a moment, the way you do, listening. The HVAC was running. That baseline sound, metal and air. The room was dark, the curtains were heavy, and the light from outside was minimal. Just a faint orange smear at the edge of the curtain where the parking lot lights came through. Then I heard it. It was inside the wall. Not okay, let me be careful here, because inside the wall sounds dramatic, And it wasn't dramatic at first. It sounded like the building settling, like the pipe knock you get in old plumbing systems when the temperature changes overnight and the metal expands or contracts. 3 or 4 sounds, irregular, slightly dull. Clunk, 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 pause, clunk. I thought, old building, old pipes. Terrence mentioned the ductwork, and I noted it mentally because I note things. It's what I do as something to check in the documentation. HVAC, or plumbing irregularity in room 614, investigate correlating maintenance records. And then the sound stopped, and I lay there for another few minutes, and nothing happened, and I went back to sleep. In the morning, I didn't write it up in my personal notes. I only wrote it in the assessment log under HVAC systems as a minor item. That's the kind of thing that tells you something about where my head was at the time. I was in compliance mode. My brain was organizing everything I experienced into the correct professional category, and the sounds in the wall went into the known infrastructure issue already flagged category, and I moved on. The fourth night, I heard it again, 3:15 this time. The same irregular knocking, and this is the part I noted to myself even then. The part that I filed and didn't open it was slightly different. Not the sharp, metallic quality of a pipe knock. Softer. More like something pressing against a surface and then releasing it. Like knuckles on drywall if you pushed rather than struck. I still didn't get up. I lay in the dark and listened, and after a while it stopped, and I went back to sleep. The breach. I broke one of Terrence's rules on the 5th night, and I want to explain why. Because it matters not for sympathy, but for accuracy. I had a headache. Not a severe one, but the kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything slightly effortful. I'd been looking at documents all day, and eating poorly, the delivery options had started to feel repetitive, and I'd skipped a proper dinner. And by 10 o'clock, I wanted aspirin, and I'd gone through my travel kit. I had melatonin and antacids and cough drops, and the aspirin I distinctly remembered packing was not there. It had probably rolled out of the bag in my previous trip. There was a vending machine alcove on the 4th floor that I'd passed during the walkthrough, and I was reasonably certain it had a small first aid section, those overpriced single packets of pain reliever that hotels keep around. I got my key card and took the elevator to 4, and it did, and I got the aspirin and came back up. Here's the thing. The elevator opened on the 6th floor, and I stepped off, and the door to the south corridor was propped open just slightly, not fully, just a few inches. By what I could see was a housekeeping cart stop, a small rubber wedge. I don't know why it was there. There was no housekeeping cart visible, just the wedge holding the corridor door open a few inches. Room 638, the out-of-service room, was visible from where I stood, and the door was open. Not slightly open, fully open. Standing wide with the darkness inside it absolute, the laminated sign still affixed to the doorframe. I stood there for a moment. What happened next is difficult to describe accurately because it involved a set of small decisions that felt individually rational and together were not. What I thought was, there's an open door. Part of my job is documenting open doors, especially in rooms with active maintenance issues. Terrence had told me myself that the latch didn't hold. This was clearly what had happened. The latch had failed again. The door had drifted open. He'd told me I could close it. He'd told me I could close it. I want to be specific about that. He said, if you see it open, you can close it. He did not say, you can look inside. The distinction seemed theoretical to me at the time. I walked to the end of the south corridor. The carpet muffled my footsteps. The amber lights were on their overnight dimming setting, lower than during the day, and the corridor had a compressed quality in that reduced light, the walls slightly closer seeming than they were. I reached room 638 and looked through the open door. It was dark inside, but not as dark as it had seemed from the elevator alcove. There was a window, uncurtained, and the faint urban light from outside came through it and illuminated the room in that flat gray-orange way. I could see a standard room layout, bed frame, no mattress, dresser against the wall, the bathroom door open, no visible mold, not that I expected to see it without proper lighting and assessment, but my professional instinct was running even then, cataloging. The carpet had been partially pulled back near the far wall, rolled and secured with tape, exposing the concrete subfloor underneath. Near the pulled-back carpet, There were two small devices I recognized as humidity monitors, the kind you use during mold remediation to track moisture levels. That was consistent with what Terrence had told me. Mold remediation, the contractors hadn't completed the work. Then I heard something from inside the wall. Not the wall of the room I was standing outside of. The wall perpendicular to it, the wall to my left, which I understood to be a shared wall between 638 and 636, the room next to it. It was a sound like I want to be precise here and I'm struggling like breathing. Not human breathing. Not exactly. More like the sound of air being drawn through a narrow space with irregular rhythm. The rhythm was wrong. It would go slow, 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 and then fast, and then pause, and then slow again. Like something calibrating. Like something that was doing the mechanical act of respiration without the organic reason for it. I stepped back from the door. I closed it. The latch caught weakly, but it caught. I walked back to my room and I did not look behind me, which took more effort than it should have. What I told myself, old buildings have a lot of sounds. That's what I told myself. Air through the walls, through gaps in insulation, through deteriorating seals around pipes and wiring. These things create sounds that are genuinely strange. Strange enough that, in certain conditions, they can seem almost biological. This is a documented phenomenon. I'd read about it actually in a facilities management context, the psychological effect of infrastructure noise on occupant perception of safety. There's literature on it. I took the aspirin, I drank a glass of water. I sat on the edge of my bed for a few minutes and listened to the HVAC and thought methodically about what I had observed, which was a building sound, in a room undergoing maintenance, in an old building with old walls. I went to sleep. What I found in the morning. I need to tell you what was in the maintenance logs. I hadn't flagged room 638 specifically because the mold remediation documentation was complete in an order timeline, contractor info, all of it. But that morning, going through the records more carefully, I pulled the full maintenance history for the 6th floor. Not because of what had happened the night before, because I was at that stage of the assessment and that's when it was scheduled. The maintenance history for room 638 went back 11 years, and it was extensive. Not just for mold, although mold was on the list, but over the 11 years there were entries for noise complaints from adjacent rooms, with the cause listed variously as HVAC irregularity, pipe vibration, and on 3 occasions simply investigated, no cause identified. There were entries for 2 separate incidents where the door to 638 had been found open despite no guests having been assigned to that room. There was an entry from 4 years ago labeled structural inspection following occupant report, with the follow-up notes redacted, physically redacted white correction tape over whatever had been written. I sat with that for a while. Then I looked at the noise complaint log more carefully. The complaints from adjacent rooms had a pattern in their dates. Not every night, not every week. But when they occurred, they clustered. 4 complaints over 3 days in November of 6 years ago, 5 complaints over 5 consecutive nights in March of 4 years ago, and then most recently 2 complaints from room 636, filed 7 and 8 months before my visit, citing sounds from the wall and irregular noises, possible pipe issue. 7 and 8 months ago, before the current long-term guest in 622. Or well, I wasn't sure about that timeline. I hadn't asked Terrence exactly when the guest in 622 had arrived. I made a note to ask. Terrence. I found Terrence in his office late that morning. He was at his desk, reading something on a printed sheet, and he gestured me in without looking up, the comfortable authority of a man in his own space. I was looking at the maintenance history for 6, I said. He folded the sheet. Of course. There are several entries for room 638 going back a number of years, noise complaints from adjacent rooms, 2 incidents of the door being found open, 1 structural inspection with redacted follow-up notes. He was quiet for a moment. The window behind him showed the parking lot, gray sky, February. The redaction, he said, was at the request of the previous GM. He redacted a handful of things before he transitioned out. I've always meant to go back and reconstruct those records, but it involves submitting a request through the ownership group, and the process is, he made a small, measured gesture. Slow. What was the previous GM's name? Harrowfield. Martin Harrowfield. He said the name flatly, without effect. How long ago did he transition out? 4 years ago. 4 years. The redacted entry was from 4 years ago. And the noise complaints, I said. The pattern of clustering. Old buildings, Terrence said. He said it the exact same way I'd said it to myself the night before. The exact same phrasing. Sound in the ductwork can have patterns related to temperature cycles, pressure differentials. It sounds like it's irregular, but there's usually a mechanical explanation. Usually, I said. He met my eyes. Usually, he agreed. I want to describe what happened in the following few seconds, because it's the kind of moment that seems small and becomes large in retrospect. Terrence looked at me with an expression that was, I would have said at the time, professional neutrality. The face of a man giving accurate information about a building he managed. But there was something else in it. Not concealment exactly, more like the expression of someone who is telling you the truth and knows that the truth is insufficient. The long-term guest in 622, I said. How long has he been here? Mr. Aldershoff, about 8 months. 8 months, I said. So he was here when the most recent noise complaints from 636 were filed. A pause, very brief. I believe so. Did he file a complaint? No, Terrence said. I wrote that down. Has he said anything to you about noise? About the wall? Terrence looked at his desk for a moment, then back at me. Mr. Aldershoff, he said carefully, doesn't complain about things. He tends to manage his own experience of the building. I wasn't sure what to do with that. One more thing, I said. The rule about not opening the fire door on the north corridor. You said false alarms had been an issue. Has the alarm on that door been triggered? Once, Terrence said, about 3 years ago, during the night. What triggered it? He looked at me with that same measured expression. The investigation was inconclusive, he said. No occupants reported any reason to open it. Dale checked the hardware and it was functioning correctly. So it opened by itself. It was open, he said, and then he seemed to decide something. The mechanism requires a push bar to release from the inside. It doesn't open on its own. I didn't say anything. That's why the rule exists, he said, as a practical matter. 638. That night, the 6th night, I didn't sleep well. Not because of the sounds. They were there after midnight. The same pressing against drywall quality. The same rhythm that was slightly wrong. I lay and listened and I tracked it. It moved. That was what I noticed this time, tracking it carefully from my position in the bed. It started near the headboard wall and it progressed, very slowly, along the wall toward the window. And then it stopped. It stopped at a point that I calculated, lying there in the dark, was roughly corresponding to where my room's wall met the corridor. And then I heard nothing for a long time. And then, from the corridor from outside my door, there was a sound, softer than the wall sounds, softer than anything. Just the faintest suggestion of pressure against carpet. A footstep, if you made a footstep very deliberately careful. And then another. And then nothing. I did not open my door. I want to be clear about that. I thought about it. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. The way you think about anything that your body wants you to do before your brain has finished evaluating whether it's a good idea. But I lay still. I lay still for what my phone eventually told me was 40 minutes, though it felt like both less and more than that, the specific timelessness of vigilance. Nothing else happened. Eventually I slept. Mr. Aldershoff. In the morning I went to the 6th floor corridor earlier than usual. I told myself it was for the assessment. I had some measurements to take in the north corridor stairwell. And that was true. But I also walked the full length of the south corridor before I did anything else, looking at the carpet. There are parts of a carpet in the low occupancy sections of a hotel on a winter morning that show things. Compression. The fiber memory of something that stood there. Most of the carpet in the south corridor was undisturbed, the kind of flat, settled look that carpet gets after days without foot traffic. But there was a stretch outside rooms 614 and 616 that had a slightly different quality. Not dramatic, just the fibers were oriented differently. in a way consistent with something having moved through that space. I took a photograph. For the assessment record, officially. For something else, personally. I was looking at the photograph on my phone when the elevator opened and Mr. Aldershoff came out. He walked toward me. He was coming from the elevator alcove toward room 622, which would take him past me, and when he got close enough, I said good morning. He stopped. Up close in the morning light from the window at the end of the corridor, he looked older than I thought, and tired. Not the tired of a bad night's sleep, but the tired of something ongoing, something endured. His eyes were gray and careful, and they went to my phone, specifically to the photograph on my phone, and then to my face. "You're the assessor," he said. "That's right." He nodded slowly. "Terrence said you'd be here for a week or so." "That's the plan." He looked at the corridor, then back at me. "Have you been sleeping well?" he asked, and the way he asked it, measured, specific, watching me closely, was not the way you make small talk. It was the way you ask a question you need an honest answer to. "Reasonably," I said. He studied me for another moment. Then, "The wall in your room, 614. The HVAC. Yes, I've heard it. It's not the HVAC." He said it without drama, very quietly, like stating the square footage of a room. I held his gaze. "What is it?" He looked down the corridor toward room 638, looked for a long moment. Then he said, "How much longer are you here?" 2 or 3 more days." He nodded again, as if confirming something he'd calculated. "Follow the rules," he said. "The ones Terrence gave you. Follow them exactly. Not approximately. Not with adjustments." "I may have opened the door last night," I said, "to 638, to close it. Just to close it." His eyes came back to me very quickly. That was the only moment his face changed, just briefly, a slight tightening, not fear but a close relative of it. The face of someone who has just received information that changes a calculation. "Did you go inside?" "No." "Did you look inside?" "Briefly." He was quiet for a moment. "Come to my room," he said. "I want to show you something." I in 622. His room was the same footprint as mine, but it had been made habitual in a way that mine wasn't. There were books on the desk and the windowsill, old books, cloth-bound, the kind of thing you don't buy but inherit or acquire over decades. There was a specific chair positioned at a specific angle to the window that told you he sat there and read. On the desk there was a notebook, open, with dense handwriting in blue ink. He gestured to the chair. He sat on the edge of the bed, the practiced perch of someone who has done a lot of thinking in that position. "I've been here 8 months, he said. "I came for reasons that aren't relevant. The point is that I've been here long enough to understand what's happening, at least partially." "What's happening?" I said. It wasn't quite a question. "The 6th floor," he said carefully, "has a problem. I don't know its origin. I don't know its nature. What I know is its behavior, because I've been paying attention and because I found the notes." He reached under his mattress, genuinely, literally, reached under the mattress at the edge, and withdrew a folded sheaf of papers. He handed them to me. They were hotel stationery, the kind that used to be standard in hotels before everything went digital, cream paper. Embossed header. The embossed header said Hargrove Suites, and below it, in a slightly different style, a date range that was now about a decade old. The handwriting was not the same as the notebook. This was someone else's handwriting, cramped, urgent in places, more careful in others, as if written over a period of time and with varying levels of composure. The person who had written these notes had stayed in room 638, had stayed there apparently for 3 weeks, had documented what they heard in the walls, had documented the pattern, starting small, moving through the walls, approaching, retreating, had written about halfway through the stack of papers a single sentence that I'm going to try to quote accurately because I have not forgotten it. "It learns the shape of you, not your appearance, the shape of what you are afraid of. And then it offers you the shape of what you want." Below that, don't open the door. Any door that you did not open yourself. Don't go toward the sound when it sounds like it's coming from somewhere you'd naturally go. And at the bottom, in handwriting that was shakier than the rest, as if written quickly or under duress, "I think Martin knows." Martin, Martin Harrowfield, the previous GM. I looked at Aldershoff. Where did you find these? Under the mattress in 638, he said, when I looked in there in the first few weeks, before I understood what the rules were actually for. You went inside 638. I did, early on. I was curious. He folded his hands. That was when the sounds started being more specific. Specific how? He was quiet for a moment. My wife's name is Eleanor, he said. She passed away 14 months ago. That's why I'm here. I'm not ready to be in our house again. So I'm here. He said this with complete steadiness, the steadiness of grief that has been worked with for long enough to be managed, though not resolved. The sounds, after I went into 638, they started being more like a voice. Not exactly her voice, like a recording of her voice played through a bad phone connection, far enough away that you could almost tell yourself it was random noise. I didn't say anything. I want you to understand, he said, that I am not an irrational person. I was an engineer, structural, 32 years. I understand building sounds. I understand acoustics. I understand the ways that grief can distort perception. He looked at me very directly. And I am telling you that what is in that wall is not a building sound. It is something that has learned enough about me to use the things I miss. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, a single car moved slowly through the parking lot. Has it used your voice? He asked. Or anyone's? I thought of the footstep sounds in the corridor, the way they'd stopped outside my door. Not yet, I said. He nodded. Then you still have some distance from it. Don't close that distance. The seventh night. I want to describe this carefully. I did not sleep. I had decided not to sleep. I sat in the desk chair, fully dressed, my phone charged and in my hand, and I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for exactly. I think I wanted to be conscious when it came, if it came. Some part of me needed to receive it clearly, the way you need to hear a diagnosis delivered plainly rather than softened into half meanings. The HVAC ran. The hour turned to midnight, then passed. At 2:11, the sound started. In the wall behind me, the headboard wall, the same as always. But I was facing it from the desk chair, and so I could orient on it directly, and I made myself do that. Sit with my back straight and my hands on the desk and listen. It moved the same way, progressing along the wall, slowly, toward the window. I tracked it. When it stopped, I noted the time. 2:28, 17 minutes. Then the silence. And then, different from before, the silence was broken not by footsteps, but by a voice. It was coming from the corridor. The words were not clear. The distance was enough to make them blurred, or something about the medium they came through blurred them. I genuinely don't know which. But the tone was clear. The tone was someone I had known speaking in the particular register of a private moment. Not calling to me, not performing, just speaking. The way a real person speaks when they don't know anyone is listening. My body understood it before I did. I was standing up before I'd made any decision to stand. I was at the door before I'd thought about moving. My hand was on the handle of the door, and the weight of my body was forward, the way you lean into things you're moving toward without realizing you're moving. And then I stopped. Not because I figured it out. I want to be precise about this, because Aldershoff had said it, and now I understood it. I didn't reason my way back from that door. What stopped me was a physical memory. The piece of stationery in my pocket, I'd folded one of the notes and put it in my pocket without fully deciding to, was pressing against my leg, and that pressure pulled my attention. And in the brief break in the pull of the voice, I looked down at my hand on the door handle and I thought, this is the shape of what I want. Not who I wanted, the shape of it, the architecture of a longing. I took my hand off the handle. I walked back to the desk chair. I sat down. I folded my hands on the desk, and I looked at the wall and I thought very clearly and calmly, I see you. The voice in the corridor went on for another few minutes. Then it stopped. I sat in the desk chair until morning. What happened to Aldershoff? I went to his room at 7 a.m. I knocked. He opened the door after the second knock. He looked different. Not dramatically, not transformed in the way of stories where something is clearly and obviously wrong. more like a photograph that's been slightly adjusted. The brightness turned up too high. His expression was arranged correctly, but the timing of it was off. The smile coming a beat too late, the blinking slightly irregular. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I said. "How did you sleep?" "Well," he said. "Very well." I looked at him for a moment. "Eleanor's name," I said. "You told me her name last night. In your room. When we talked." He looked at me pleasantly. "Yes? What's the rest of her name?" "Her maiden name." A pause. It was short, very short. The pause of someone searching a file that should be instantly accessible. "Kershaw," he said. "Eleanor Kershaw." He said it correctly. He said it without hesitation, ultimately, but there had been a pause, and the way he said it had the quality of something retrieved rather than something known. I said that I'd see him later, and I went downstairs. Terrence. I was in Terrence's office for 20 minutes. I told him everything. Not as I've told it here. I didn't have the language for most of it yet, and what I had didn't feel adequate, but the key points. The sounds, Aldershoff's account, the notes from 638, the corridor, the voice, the moment at the door. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at his desk. "Mr. Aldershoff," he said, "something's different about him this morning. I don't know how to quantify that." Terrence nodded slowly. He opened his desk drawer and removed a form. A physical form printed, structured, with boxes to fill in. He slid it across the desk to me. The header said, "Incident Report Occupant Behavioral Anomaly." Below that were fields for date, room number, floor, description of incident. At the bottom there was a field labeled Reporting Authority and a line for signature. Below the signature line in small print was a reference to what appeared to be a corporate parent company, followed by a jurisdiction code that I didn't recognize. "This happens," Terrence said. I looked at the form. "How often?" "Infrequently." He paused. "But it has happened before. A protocol exists." "What's the protocol?" He put his hands flat on the desk. "The ownership group is notified. A team is sent. They conduct an assessment of the affected individual and of the physical space. Mr. Aldershoff will be assisted to another property." He paused. "It will be explained to him in terms that make sense to him. And 638? Will be managed. I don't know the technical specifics." "Has it been managed before?" He met my eyes. "You read the maintenance logs," he said. "Yes." "Then you know the answer." I looked at the form again. "The previous GM Harrowfield. Did he file one of these?" A long pause. "Martin filed one," Terrence said carefully, "and was then himself flagged for a follow-up assessment." He stopped there. "He transitioned out shortly after." Meaning he was moved to a different role, in a different property, in a location I'm not aware of. I signed the form. I don't fully know why I signed it. It felt like the right thing to do in the way that things feel right when you're inside a system that has a logic and you are tired and frightened and someone is offering you a procedure. Maybe that's all institutions are in the end. A procedure for when you are too tired to think of one yourself. The last morning, the team came 2 days later. They were two people, a man and a woman, both in their 40s, professional in a way that had no specific sector attached to it. They could have been insurance adjusters or health and safety officials or any number of things. They had credentials that Terrence examined carefully and apparently found satisfactory. They went to Aldershoff's room and I don't know what they said to him, but he came down to the lobby an hour later with his bags packed, and one of the staff members helped him to a car, and he left. He passed me in the lobby. I was standing near the breakfast room and he was walking toward the door, and for a moment our eyes met. And here's the thing I have not been able to find a way to process. His eyes when they met mine were clear, fully present, and in them there was something that I would describe as a recognition of loss. The specific recognition of someone who understands that something has happened to them that they don't fully have access to. He looked at me the way you look at someone who witnessed something that you can't quite remember. He didn't say anything. He went out the door. I watched the car pull away. The form. My assessment was filed and complete. The Hargrove Suites had a handful of compliance items that needed addressing fire door certifications, some documentation gaps, the outstanding contractor work in 638. All of it was logged, structured, formally noted. In my final report, under the sixth floor section, I wrote the following. HVAC system on this floor produces irregular noise consistent with aged ductwork. Occupant complaints in maintenance history appear attributable to this cause. No structural or safety concern identified beyond items noted in Section 4B. I filed it. It was accepted. I received a standard sign-off from the property and from my firm. 3 months later, I received a separate email from an address I didn't recognize, with no subject line. The body of the email contained one sentence. The compliance on the sixth floor has been addressed. Thank you for your report. No signature. The sending address returned an error when I tried to reply. I don't know who sent it. I don't know what addressed means in that context. I have theories, but theories are not documentation. After I still do this job, I still travel. I still stay in hotels that are half empty, in rooms on quiet floors, in buildings with old infrastructure, and sounds in the walls at 2 a.m. Most of the time, the sounds are exactly what they are. Air through ductwork, pipes contracting in cold weather, the unremarkable physics of an old building trying to maintain equilibrium in a world that's always just slightly too cold or too warm, most of the time. I've thought a lot about Aldershot, about the notes from 638, which I still have photocopied, the originals I left on Terrence's desk because they felt like they belonged to the building in some way I can't fully articulate. I've thought about the sentence, it learns the shape of you, the shape of what you are afraid of, and then it offers you the shape of what you want. What I keep coming back to is the door. The moment at the door, hand on the handle, weight forward. How close that was, how the thing that stopped me wasn't understanding or courage, but a piece of paper pressed against my leg, in the simple, almost accidental act of looking down. That tells you something about how close these things are, how little separates the moment before you open a door from the moment after, how most of what we call good judgment is really just friction, just the small, almost random interruptions that give us enough time to choose differently. I don't know what was in the wall. I genuinely don't. Not in the sense of having a theory I've suppressed. I mean that the shape of it is genuinely outside any category I have. What I know is what it did. What I know is that it learned Aldershot well enough to offer him Eleanor, or the shape of Eleanor, or whatever is the functional equivalent of Eleanor in the grammar of whatever it speaks. And I know that he went toward it at some point on some night I wasn't there to observe, and that after that, he was not fully what he had been. He was mostly what he had been. Mostly. His hands still clasped behind his back when he walked. He still moved with the deliberate quietness of a man managing his own experience of a building. But in the lobby that last morning, when his eyes met mine, there was a door in him that wasn't there before. Or there was a door that had been opened. You can tell the difference when you know what to look for. I go through the written rules now when they're given to me. I take them seriously, specifically, not approximately. And when I wake up in the dark of a quiet hotel, in a room on an upper floor, in a building that's mostly empty, and something in the wall begins to move, I turn on the light. I turn on the light, and I wait for morning to come, find me exactly where I am. End.